Hello and welcome to the Open Air Podcast. My name is Devang and Simon. I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bushell. Happy New Year to all of you. And we return with Open Air Gold to welcome in 2024. Simon, one final look back at 2023. My pick for Women's Match of the Year. We couldn't let the year go by without revisiting the match that set the table for a banger of a women's tennis season. It's Sabalenka, Rybakina, Melbourne, Aussie Open final, Simon. How good was that?
Fantastic. What an intro as well. I was wondering whether you were going to get another tie on at the end there, like a button, they say in the comedic world.
I'm glad you stopped me because I just was going to keep going, keep making ties, keep making illusions, the full shebang.
Exactly. Open Era Gold tennis podcast this Thursday.
Don't you love to see it? Tennis is back. Happy New Year, etc.
As a side note, I did look up in preparation for this something gold related, trying to consistently have something at the start of a podcast, and the only thing that I got of interest, of note this week, what will gold be worth in 5 years, as an article written by The Economist. And I decided to spare everyone from that without actually reading that article. Open Era Gold, nothing to do with that, by the way.
Nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with The Economist. But
thank God.
To make a horrible tie back to tennis, or try to. If you were making stock picks, like you were to pick up gold, let's say, on the market, Simon, you could do this with tennis players. I wonder where your stock was at with Sabalenka heading into 2023, because I think we had seen glimpses of the player that potentially had all the tools to be the best women's player in the game for a long time. She put that together with deep runs at Wimbledon in 2021, but 2023 was really hello and welcome to the top echelon of tennis, Aryna Sabalenka.
So I guess the story coming into this match is whether Aryna Sabalenka had finally cracked the code in terms of her both mental strength to get over the line in big moments, and also whether or not she had fixed her serve. Because that was the big thing to circle in a match preview in this 2023 Australian Open, is whether or not the big Belarusian had finally figured out what to do in pressure moments on serve. And I think it's answered in a pretty emphatic way, in a way that, honest to God, shut me up no end. Because I did not expect the way that she served in this final. And I did not really expect the way that she served to start this season as well, because really it was phenomenal.
Once again, it set the table for what she was able to do for most of this season. Like it's someone who was able to bust up a lot of narratives that I think dragged her down. Like you mentioned the mentality, like there's a lot of pressure on her in this final. I think it's fair to say there's a lot more pressure on her than Rybakina in this final. Like Rybakina obviously proving herself as an elite player, winning a slam at Wimbledon, the slam no one wanted her to win. But I feel like the idea of Sabalenka missing her window was a real conversation we were having at the beginning of this season, probably unfairly. But Rybakina was maybe the person you want to play the least in this situation as well, Simon. Not in the sense that she has nothing to lose, but she has no one to fear and no one to wilt from. And I think from Sabalenka's vantage point, it felt like there was a pressure point that any sort of calamity, any sort of false step could cause a catastrophic meltdown.
Yeah, it's true. I think she was quoted going into this final about some of the losses that she'd had at the semi-final stages, saying that she actually felt relatively happy that she'd lost those matches because it made her stronger. And it's obviously easier saying that once you'd won a final, but I thought it was interesting as well that she actually had those thoughts going into it, is that the mental resilience required to really stay with it, because she could easily have gone away, right? Just given all of the big time losses that she had, and given all of the questions that were surrounding her as well. And I think she answered it just in a really emphatic way in general. The big stat as well for this one coming in, just to put some numbers on it from serve, is that she hit nearly 60 double faults in the Australian Open of 2022 and was at about 20 for the tournament in 2023. That's a phenomenal difference in terms of your ability to stay in points and also to not give away cheap points in pressure situations. And that doesn't even take into account, if you're serving 60 double faults, that means you're serving some pretty shit second serves as well in there as well that aren't taken into account on those numbers. So the improvement is pretty staggering. And I think it plays a huge role in how she's able to get across the line in this final.
Yeah. And I mean, it was also one of those rare matches where I think the level went up as the stakes got higher, which, I mean, sometimes you see maybe one player accept this invitation, whereas one player declines it and kind of goes away and hides and wants to be over as quickly as possible. But I think both players, the way they played, lended itself to really great theater. They both went for it. They both attacked. I mean, you mentioned those numbers, Simon. Like, there was no scared tennis here. And when you have big hitters like this who hit different balls like they do, like, that's really cool. Just as a tennis fan.
I think it is, yeah. I think when people look at this one, they'll think that they have fairly similar styles. And I think they do, right? I think they are big hitters. They hit, I think, slightly differently in terms of technique and all the things that are associated with that kind of ball striking. But in general, they are two athletes that certainly like to go after their shots, put it that way. And given how the winners and unforced errors sort of shake out at the end of this final, I think we're treated to a really enjoyable match. Like, one, just if you watched it as a neutral, it was a good high quality final. I think one of the things that's slightly underwhelming, and I don't mean this as to be disrespectful about this final, but how I'm watching it back, a year removed from when it happened, of just kind of how straightforward it was. It was almost there was a break, and there was another break, and there was another break, and that was it. And it was like, well, okay, that's how tennis can work sometimes. It's not all, dramatic back and forth swings. It was a match that was very high quality and yet oddly lacking a little in drama, maybe slightly, or is that being too?
Well, let's
too disingenuous?
mention. I think we could mention the elephant in the room. It's that Rybakina is representing Kazakhstan and Sabalenka is representing Belarus, but like Belarus not recognized anymore alongside Russia, and half the reason Rybakina's win at Wimbledon was muted was because she was representing Kazakhstan and her links to Russia as well. Like, we mentioned this before we recorded, Simon, like Sabalenka off the court this year. It's been interesting as well. Like, we're seeing a lot of the TikTok stuff and like on Instagram and with her team, and just having a great time, and she seems really personable. And then you get some quotes about the war and how she feels unfairly treated. And I think it's a lot to weigh. It's a lot to weigh for the crowd as well at times. Not to say that the folks in Melbourne are the arbiter of virtue and truth, but I wonder if that also had something to do with it in the sense that, like, it didn't feel like it had, like, we shouldn't need this either. The crowd has to be like gung-ho and insane about things for us to enjoy things. But I wonder if that had a role in the atmosphere as well.
Yeah, potentially two women that are not, despite their stature in the game, particularly well known by the general public. And I'm kind of curious to know whether or not your average sports fan who's going to watch the Australian Open final was really familiar with the body of work of Elena Rybakina and Aryna Sabalenka. I think they are two players that potentially the casual fan would be aware of without perhaps knowing in depth about who they are. So maybe lacking a little bit in that storyline. I think two people who have very, very different personalities. And I think as a hardcore tennis fan, there was a ton to get into on this one. Not least all the things you were mentioning about where the fact that Aryna Sabalenka is not playing beside a flag here, which is its own thing to kind of unpack. But yeah, maybe the fact that they are just maybe not that well known slightly is caused this final to have a slightly muted feel as well.
It's also the curse of the Australian Open, and when things happen in January, we render them to the waste bin of history by the time we do the year-end list. But I will push back a bit, Simon, because I do think that the pressure, it felt like the pressure on Sabalenka was relentless from the very first ball of the match. And that, for me, made the stakes really interesting. Because I also think like Rybakina is very cool, collected, and like doesn't give you much. And you have this complete contrast. I think Sabalenka has been able to rein it in slightly, and it showed to good effect this year. But she doesn't hide how she's feeling. I think the difference is, and in this match, especially after she loses the first set, and Rybakina is hitting flat and aggressive and consistent, and Sabalenka is not doing those things. She's hitting aggressive, but with spin, wildly missing at times. I think what you didn't see is Sabalenka get down on herself like she had been in the past. And that was a huge difference because I didn't notice any sort of huge tactical change from Sabalenka. It was perhaps the idea or the belief in the game plan to keep going because in neutral rallies, she's likely going to be okay, or she can find her angles better or easier than Rybakina based on her skill set.
Yeah, and I think if you want to be truly reductive about this whole thing, this final is summarized by the fact that Rybakina won a ton of points on her first serve and won a ton of points on her second serve in the first set, and then just didn't. Sabalenka got into so many more games and attacked the second serve, and her win percentage of points just went down dramatically. And I think that was the difference in this final. I think, it's perhaps crass and easy analysis, but if you're not winning points on your second serve and you're constantly under pressure the way that Rybakina was, then it was only going to really end one way. And I think that's illustrated by the fact that Sabalenka did force a lot of breakpoint chances. All of this is kind of surprising, given how good of a server Rybakina is, ace leader, all those kind of things you want to throw into it, given how good of a tournament she had as well. So the fact that the Belarusian was able to find as many holes in that serve the way that she did is a little surprising, but she certainly got an eye in and certainly got a read of it, Dev, because set 2 onwards, she was hitting big often, early and often in rallies.
Well, her serve was insane, too. Like, her serve was really good. I think she had 17 aces, 51 winners to 28 errors in a major final. Yeah, it's the match report from Tumani Carriol. It's excellent, kind of summing up how complete the last 2 sets were for Sabalenka. I think you mentioned the second serve, Simon. Like, she was teeing off on those second serves. That maybe 3-1 juncture or 1-3 juncture in the second set. From then on, it was huge. Like, it felt like the peak Sabalenka display in terms of shot making and aggression. Fixing the serve, or what she has done to fix the serve, is also something that I think is fascinating, Simon. Like, we've talked about people changing their serve 3 or 4 times during a season. But like what Sabalenka did in terms of going to a sports psychologist, but also going to a biomechanics expert to watch yourself serve thousands and thousands of times and to figure out the right way to do it. I can't imagine how it feels to be able to like actualize that and put all the hours of training into one of the biggest moments of your life, the biggest moment of your life to this point on the tennis court. Like, what a feeling.
Yeah, and the fact that it was successful as well. I think it's all very well and good doing the work, and you have to give huge credit to her to go back and do that work. But the fact that it held up in such pressure points, and that her serve was a weapon as well. It wasn't just like she was rolling it in and she was doing enough to survive and stay in rallies. It was a massive, massive reason that she won this title. And some would say like it's the reason that she won this title as well, because on those big pressure points and big pressure moments, she answered the bell every single time. And I said at the start of this episode, it shut me up because you'd seen that story so many times and you've got a track record of this player falling and folding in those moments where her serves let her down. And then to see all of that work come back and her to slam the door repeatedly is a tremendous achievement and one that should give him massive credit.
It's worth noting where we left Australia in terms of the conversation, because in this tournament, Rybakina kind of thrashed Iga Swiatek, Bush. And I think that's when the big three conversation was really taking hold. And then we went into Indian Wells in Miami, where I think if anything, it strengthened, because we got a replay of this final, and Rybakina winning this time in that incredible tiebreak. I think it was 13-11. Rybakina makes the final at Miami again. I know Iga won in Qatar in between all this, but like, it did feel like we had a big three in the WTA. I think we still do. We may probably open it up to a few more players, but I think it is a bit hilarious that Iga did come back and kind of corrected the conversation a bit towards the end of the season, even though we had Marketa Vondrousova win Wimbledon.
Yeah, I mean, especially on clay, you could argue that Swiatek never really looked in danger at all of losing, certainly at Grand Slam level. And I think it was a good final to win. God, it sounds so ridiculous to say out loud, but they're all good finals to win. But this one especially for Sabalenka, just given the moment, given where her career was at, given all of the times that she was not successful at semi-final stages, to do what she did in this final and to answer those outstanding questions about whether she could get across the line. I think it set us up for a really, really nice year, because you had three very, very dominant players, all of which had their own strengths and weaknesses. And I think it was great for the game and for the women's tour in general.
No, it was big. And you mentioned it was good that she got that one, but it was because I feel like we would have felt a lot worse about what happened in New York. Maybe. I think a lot of people wanted Coco Gauff to win that final for obvious reasons, but I was curious how Sabalenka would play after getting the proverbial monkey off her back. And I mean, she was always around. She consistently at big moments, in these big tournaments. I do wonder though how it would have affected her going forward if she wasn't able to pull through in this final. So I'm glad we don't have to consider that thought in some ways, because we got to see maybe a little more unfiltered Sabalenka off the court as well, in terms of how she is as a person. I mean, I'm having a hard time not coming back to this, Simon, in terms of how big a role politics plays in sports, and the idea of shying away from that is foolish. But I do find it interesting the way we talk about tennis, and especially the off the court stuff, and how we're going to market the hell out of the sport and sell dollars and get more advertisers interested. Sorry, I think it's interesting to me that we started with maybe the big three being the thing in the WTA, and then it also kind of meted out to Coco Gauff is obviously here, and Osaka's coming back, and we have all these other storylines, but I don't know if the powers that be are comfortable with just having it be Sabalenka, Swiatek, Rybakina, right? Like, if they were, it's not that good for them because of the reason that we described in terms of the atmosphere in this final. Like, I don't think that's a fair statement, and I feel bad saying it, but I also feel it's kind of true.
There's also another elephant in the room on this one, which I think is a particularly sexist argument, but one I think that is impossible to not circle in on here, which is that people don't like her grunting on court. It's just not a very enjoyable experience for a lot of people. And I think a lot of that stuff is oftentimes overblown, and the same criticisms are not given to some male players. I'm looking in your direction, Rafael Nadal. But she gets it, she gets it a lot from all different sides. And I think she's not without criticism on that one as well. I don't think it is necessary quite the way that it is done on court with her. But, this is how players are taught to play. This is how they're coached in some regards, which is to exhale and, have these mechanisms in order to make sure they're doing the right things. But a lot of people don't like it, Dev. And that's probably another reason why she's not liked in some quarters.
Elena Rybakina, Bush, excellent year to follow up that Wimbledon triumph and end in the top four. And also, I mean, it was a shame it had to come from that scheduling issue in Montreal. But I think we saw some more personality from her as well. I mean, whenever she's on a vlog, I tune in because I think there'll be some good stuff there. But phenomenally consistent. Sabalenka ending at second in the year, not very far behind Swiatek. Seems about right based on the full full body of work from 2023, Simon, that we would have both players end up in the top 4. And I do really feel like this set the table for a phenomenal season on the WTA, this final in Melbourne.
I think it's, I have perhaps some small criticisms of this final, but in general, I think it's a fantastic advertisement for the sport and for women's tennis. In general, the storylines, galore all over the place. So it's definitely worth checking out on a replay viewing of it. It is incredible to me that Aryna Sabalenka did not finish the world number 1, just given the year that she had. It's still crazy to me, just given her performances at Grand Slam level, that she wasn't able to finish out the year at the top of the sport. Goes to show you how good of a year Iga Swiatek must have had as well.
Those shambolic WTA finals were important.
They were,
in a couple of ways, because that's how you secured number 1. All right, that is Open Era Gold for 2023. Simon, had a blast reliving these matches with you. Do you want to do any honorable mentions quickly? Anything that stood out before we wrap up?
Probably not.
No.
There's no honorable mentions.
We're good.
Let's say goodbye to 2023. Hopefully next year we'll...
Tommy Paul in Toronto was fun. Yeah, Tommy Paul in Toronto was fun, but we can leave it there. That's it. 2024. Hello. And hello to a new tennis season. Thanks for joining us on Open Era Gold and on Open Era. A reminder, we are on patreon.com/Open Era. Join us there. Get the pod ad-free. Get it early on Sundays. Plus, join us on the Discord where we're chatting tennis all the time. For producer Dylan on the 1s and 2s, and for Simon, thank you so much for listening to Open Era. Happy New Year, and we'll talk to you soon.